So for me, success is doing the things you want to do with the people that you want to be doing them with. I work with enough C-suite, high-performing individuals on the face of it that are still lost as to what success looks like to them. There is a ton of research out there around success and happiness and what that level looks like with regards to finances. And we all know this. But we just keep getting, it's one way to measure yourself. We all need this perception of growth. We all need this ability to see us tracking better and getting success. The one way that's the easiest way to do that is to measure our income, right? Now, there is a ton of research out there that says that isn't a good way of measuring your success, right? But we fall into this trap time and time again. We're all guilty of it. And so when you can measure and learn to measure ways with your people that you care about, people with like your family, people that you want to spend some time with and get to do the things that you want to do in this one life that you get, then for me, that's success. And
Gaz, thank you very much for joining me today. Hope you're well. How is everything your end?
Excellent. Thanks, Fergus. No, really pleased and looking forward to where this chat goes, mate.
Yeah, so for context, we've had a lot of conversations in the past. I've jumped on your podcast, part 1 and part 2, actually, with some different reflections in part 2. Some lessons learned, shall we say, but you were a man that, yeah, I was going to say, you're a man that's learned many lessons. You've been in lots of situations that have forced learning. And I think I just want to get right into it and ask the question, as somebody who's had to operate and perform in a very high pressure environment, what does it take to lead a team in a high pressure environment, in your opinion?
Yeah, man. It's genuinely a good question, and there's not going to be a succinct answer that I can give you those one or two things. There's clearly a lot of things. As I do a lot of thinking about this, and again with the groups of people and teams that I work with, but if I could distill it down into a number of things, and right up at the top of that list would be authenticity, being both honest with yourself and honest with the teams that you're representing, leading, depending on how you're kind of positioned. Then being authentic is a really good long-term strategy. Things can never come back and bite you in the arse, or you can never fall foul of you just doing honestly the right thing at the right time as far as you saw it in the moment. So for me, authenticity is absolutely critical. And it comes back to knowing thyself. And I know I talk about it a lot of times throughout the days, the various different people I speak to, but it's probably going to be a common theme, the things I talk about, knowing yourself and where your strengths and weaknesses are. More importantly, your strengths, and working to your strengths, having a team of people around you that you're a leader of, and relying on those is absolutely critical, mate. So, I would say authentically being yourself and knowing yourself is critical, and there's lots of ways that you can do that.
It's interesting as well, because you've distilled it down much better than I think you gave yourself credit for doing at the start there, and you've come from a very non-relatable background in terms of career, and you've managed to make the leadership that goes into that one that's very relatable to myself, to those listening. And just for a bit of context, I think it's probably worth giving a bit of an overview of your military career, where you started, where you got to, what ultimately your post as Sergeant Major of the SBS involved in the latter years of your career, just to give some context to actually the levels of pressure that you've had to apply those principles of authenticity and almost delegating skills.
Yeah, we'll probably park the pressure in those positions. We'll come back to that, but I think separately as a kind of canter over my career up to this point. So I was a military man, really. I was at college, A levels, didn't know what I wanted to be when I grow up. Still not convinced, I'm sure, of that right now, but I'm working on it, and we can talk more about that later. But there was a number of things that had happened in my life up to that point that had given me an interest in the military. Now, the exact start of that seed, I don't know, but certainly reading the book Bravo 20 by Andy McNabb, again, someone of my age group, famous book, and it was one of the first ones that really got written about the SAS, and that like opened up this kind of distant vision and wow, what a career that would be. And for me, it was almost that is a dream kind of reality of what I could possibly become. My eyes were opened in essence. At a similar sort of time, I think there was a TV program on of the Royal Marines, and I've been thinking about this recently, and I've told this story many times, but not this particular detail, where I think one of the things in that program that I saw, and there's been a number of programs on the Marines in the past, but the thing that was important to me is that some of the people within there were fallible, and some of the people within the program weren't as good as my perceptions. If I'd have not seen it, I probably would have put people. Now, I always talk, again, we come back to this, but I always talk about finding your ideal self and relating it to where you are currently. And I think things like that enabled me to see, actually, this might be achievable for me. So off I went, I volunteered for the Royal Marines. I had this is going to be a common theme as well, Fergus. I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. There was no military experience in my family. And I just went in blind to the careers office. That went well. I then went down for a 3-day, what you used to call a PRC, potential recruits course. Did awful, but managed to get through. I suffered and scraped through somehow. And then went on to Royal Marine training. Again, every single day, struggled, injured myself, managed to hang on to the group that I joined with every single day, was very much middle of the road throughout most of training, and ended up passing out as a Royal Marine sort of after the 30 weeks, and had a career in the Royal Marines for a number of years. A few years later, the Twin Towers attack happened. That for me was a bit of a kick up the arse. Well, one, it was shocking, it was abhorrent, and it was a bit of a kick up the arse to really think about what I was doing. The Marines, although on the face of it, a high-performing organisation, and again, we can go into this in more detail if you wish, I didn't feel like it was as high as I could be. I remember I'd read the book, Bravo 20. I'd a number of points in my career, friends of mine had tried and failed Special Forces selection, and one or two of them had gone off and been successful, or people I knew anyway. And they just disappeared, and I was like, well, that is really attractive. That's a high-performing job for me, and it kind of, the Twin Towers attack really motivated me to join Special Forces and get on their selection process with zero expectations of passing, with zero insight of what that was actually going to entail. And again, I went through that process. Again, we can talk about that in more detail if you wish, but got spat out of that after the first attempt and was successful. I'd volunteered for the SBS. That put me down in the SBS in about 2003. Again, that organisation was going through incredible change at that time, which I rode the crest of that wave really, and spent the next 16 years down there, very operational, from private or Marine rank right up to Sergeant Major, and managing, being a part of, leading teams all the way through that and up to kind of my final positions within there, which was I was the lead recruiter initially for my organisation for the SBS. The kind of talent ID wasn't called that, but in corporate world, that's what it'd be classed as now. So again, an awful lot of thinking of the kind of people we were looking for, scrutinising, shaping the funnel to them getting in, and very much kind of coaching and mentoring people into the organisation if we could, and through the selection process, hundreds in fact. And then finally, my last job, we got good results there. And again, bearing in mind my main competitor was the SAS, a tough competitor. We got good results there, and I was asked to oversee recruitment, be the lead recruiter for the whole of UKSF. And again, a privileged position for the last sort of 6 to 9 months of my career. Again, interesting job, and one that really sort of cemented that coaching and mentoring role, where I realised, what it took, what we're looking for, what those people have in abundance, and how we can bring that out of them, that potential. To the point where when I was leaving the military, I was kind of thinking what it was that I wanted to be when I left, and was there a spot for me as a coach or a mentor to people in a more maybe public sector or corporate setting. And 2 years down the line, it turns out there is, and that's what I do now. Again, in the last 2 years, my mind's been blown, to be perfectly honest, with the organisations that I've been fortunate enough to work with, from very top financial companies, Barclays Bank, JP Morgan, etc., down to the top sports teams, the England football squad, Manchester United. And so, really broad experiences, and to the point where I genuinely enjoy what I do now, helping other people kind of maximise themselves, knowing themselves, and working through their daily battles and struggles, I guess. So, no, it's a bit of a journey, but happy to unpick any of that you wish, mate.
Well, I think there's several points we could extract, but the question that sort of jumped out at me there was, well, there's a few, but I'll start with number one, which is the Twin Towers gave you a kick up the arse, you said, and I'm interested to hear what that kick in the arse manifested itself as. Was it patriotism? Was it duty? Was it justice? Was it anger? What was the source of that galvanised response that you felt internally?
So it's a great question. I was in an organisation that all my career up to that point, bear in mind, I dreamt about joining the Royal Marines. There's a whole story about, in the years building up to me getting I could have joined at 16. I didn't. I chose to do my A-levels. And I had a place at university, Loughborough University. I didn't. I joined the Marines. There was a decision that I dreamt about getting in. I was really keen to get in. And a few years into that, I realised, as much as I was enjoying it for a number of reasons, it also, I felt like I had more to give. So there was this internal way of measuring my own performance. And I felt, you know what, I feel like I've got more to give. And whilst I wasn't surrounded by people that were not as good as me, far from it, a lot of people were highly talented. There was just this internal drive for me to ask more questions of myself, really, and to take my career as where I felt it could go. Now, what drives that is probably my upbringing, my childhood, very sporting, very competitive. I've always sought feedback. I've never shirked feedback. I've always, and for me, competition, adventure, things like that, they give you the feedback, an immediate feedback. And I've always enjoyed that. And it's tough, it's hard, but that feedback, again, Royal Marines training, Royal Marines career, gave me some really tough feedback. I messed up so many times. I grew up with an older sister. I lost so many times, but I still love competing. And I still enjoyed kind of losing to my older sister, because I was learning more about myself. It was never in competition with her, it was a competition with myself. And I've always enjoyed piecing that together for me, of how I can keep stepping upwards. So the Twin Towers attack, in answer to your question, it's probably all of the things you describe. I would have classed myself at the time as patriotic. I don't necessarily now. I'm not much more kind of one nation, one love kind of man, but at the time, I would have classed myself as patriotic, but I don't think that was the driving force, because it wasn't an act against us. It was an act against, what I would see as honest, hard-working society. And for me, that was absolutely abhorrent, and something that I wanted to try and help or do something against. That's the wrong word. To do something to help. And so I didn't know a way to do that. And I just knew that the Royal Marines wasn't going to help me do that. And it just didn't feel like an organisation that could, because of the scale of the problem. For me, and it's ridiculous to say it out loud now, but for me, the only way I could see to really help that situation was to volunteer for Special Forces. That was real for me at the time. And again, that will be really important for people listening to understand. It hasn't got to be real. It's got to be real for you. And if it's real for you, you can be motivated to try and, make those steps to achieve whatever it is when you want to achieve. So that's what I did. I went off, and it was definitely a lot of anger involved in that. There was definitely a fire to try and again, when we talk about really stressful events and we talk about really big challenges, having an anchor, having something you can refer back to in the moment to go, why am I here again? And that image of the Twin Towers, maybe that plane, I've still got the video, the plane going into the side of it, and the thousands of people that have died, and tens of thousands, millions that have been affected by it. It's still, it's still abhorrent. It's still awful. And so that was a big driver for me. And probably a combination of all the things that you mentioned.
There's almost two elements that I drew out there. One is almost that it drew back the curtain on the stage in which you then realised you were almost placed to perform, which is an almost individual side of things, and then there's the more community, this is abhorrent, something needs to be done side, which is where a lot of blokes take the decision to step that up, don't they? So I think that leads into the second question I had about the depth of your career, whereby the tail end of it, you were exploring the characteristics and the ideal traits that you'd be looking for in those that could pass and be drawn into selection to come out the other end as the candidates that we want to be the elite of the elite within the armed forces. And I know you won't be able to distill it down into bullet points, but the conversations we've had in the past, the overarching theme has been that there isn't an ideal candidate, but there are ideal lessons that need to be learned to get a person in the right place to be in the mindset that they need to be to approach selection. And if that makes sense to you, I'm just going to open up the floor for you to develop that a little bit, because it's kind of reaching into conversations we've had in the past as a terribly worded question, but a bit of an angle for you to broaden on.
Yeah. So what is it that we're looking for? Is that the question?
In theory, yeah.
So it's a fantastic question, and it's incredibly complicated. In a nutshell, if I could distill it down, and I will, I would say people that are prepared to navigate uncertainty. So me joining the Marines, and again, this is my story, and it's my origin story, if you like, and it's useful for people to understand themselves. But, as a volunteer for Marines, I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. I was prepared to navigate whatever challenges were thrown my way. When I went on to selection, I had not spoken to anybody that had passed. I'd only ever spoken to people that had failed. So I had some idea, but that was massively skewed by their, rightly so, sort of tail between their legs, stories of absolute impossibility of passing the course. So it was a pretty warped view of what the selection process was like. And I knew, again, maybe not consciously, but I knew subconsciously I just had to go and find out myself. I was never going to get the answers that I needed and whether I was what they were looking for. So I myself was prepared to go into the unknown. And again, for context, I think it's important. When I did that was beginning of 2003, back end of 2002, and a long time ago now. And there wasn't an awareness of anything to do with what they did. It was so much more this level of secrecy. Now, I guess some people would be saying, well, in part because of people like me talking a little bit more about it. I mean, I only ever share the kind of personal, the kind of human aspect to it, never really the detail of the organisations. But there is a lot more known about the organisations. The internet has it's out there. There is data out there. There's information you can, at the touch of a button or the type of a keypad, you can find out anything you want nowadays within some level of detail. And so, I didn't grow up having that access. We had the children's Britannica, Book of Britannica, that was our resource for getting information. I sound like a real old knob, but there was a lot of information that we didn't have access to, and we had no way. Nowadays it's different. And so people, and again, I'm the same. If I want to know something, I just Google it. But navigating that uncertainty, going towards something where you don't know what the answers are, you've got no idea, I think that's really important. So that's absolutely a key thing that we're looking for with individuals, that a willingness to go into something that's unknown, but they trust in themselves that they'll not give up and they'll not stop until somebody else says that's enough, or it's time to switch focus and do something else now. And that's quite important. Now, I feel really lucky with me learning all this and kind of doing an awful lot of thinking. I'm fascinated by this, Fergus. I've got an interest in psychology. I've always been fascinated by it, and so I've always looked through my career through the lens of a bit of psychology. And so I've always been thinking about these things in a little bit more detail. And I was really lucky towards the end of my career, probably about 4 years before the end, to be invited out to Wharton Business School to go and visit something called the Mission Critical Team Institute. What on earth is that? Well, Wharton Business School is the world's most successful business school on the basis of what their graduates earn when they leave. Again, that's a separate story to one of measure success, but that's how they measure it. It's viewed as number one in the world. And their Mission Critical Team Institute is a program that's led by a great guy called Professor Preston Klein, and Doctor now, actually, Professor Klein, Preston Klein. And he runs this Mission Critical Team Institute, where Mission Critical Team is defined as groups of teams of people that within 300 seconds or less have problems thrown at them that if they don't solve them, there's catastrophic issues on the back of that. So like loss of life or huge problems. So organizations like NASA, organizations like Special Forces, organizations like the FBI, organizations like CIA, all these organizations, really, SEAL Team 6 were there, the Delta were there, all these awesome organizations were there. And little old me was invited out to kind of give my 5 pence worth as well, and to understand what exactly the question that you've asked, who is it we're looking for? Is it different? And how do we extrapolate that from people that have volunteered, basically? And there's a ton of things, but some of the common themes within all that is this people's willingness to walk towards the problem. That is an unusual thing for people to want to do, more unusual than not. That a terrific car crash, most people will watch. Most people won't walk towards the problem. Some people will, and absolutely some people. And that kind of sheepdog mentality, that kind of almost the servant mentality to other people is one part of that. Other things that we see, the ability to manage stress. It's like stress is going to come at us whether we like it or not. Some people can manage it well. They can, take themselves to high levels, but get themselves back down. To be able to find people that can regulate themselves, that know themselves well enough to know how to do that. We don't have the time, these organizations, to teach people all of these skills over time. So we've got a brief amount of time to select for them. So certainly that resilience is another thing that these people have in abundance, where they are going to get knocked down. They are going to be faced with incredibly impossible challenges that they can just go at, bite off as big a chunk as they can, learn they've not got the skills to do what they need to do, to maybe go seek more other people's advice or learn more about themselves, to prepare themselves better, and then to come back and reattack the problem again. This resilience is one of those things that we just see time and time again. So there's a ton of things that actually these people have, but there's some common themes. I think one of the things that sums it up best for me is that sheepdog mentality, almost viewing yourself in kind of a servant role, but almost a protector, a guardian almost. That's a common thing, whether you're in NASA. And what drives people to go to space? I mean, really, we know there's not a lot out there, but it's this belief that, well, actually, one day we may need to get this human race off to a different planet, because we could all be hit by an asteroid, I guess. I know this is some astronauts' motivating factors, and that's a servant mentality. You're not doing it for us; you're doing it for the greater good of the human race. And again, that intrinsic motivation to do things for a greater good is another kind of common theme.
A lot of it's almost surprisingly simple, isn't it? In that you just need the person who possesses those traits for them to be developed, because ultimately you don't go into the organisation as the refined finished product. You just need to hit the minimum entry point, and then that malleability is the journey. And I know you're a huge fan of talking about that concept, the journey, the process, but social media is rife with talking about getting yourself comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's something that you and I have discussed. It's something that I know we both discuss publicly ourselves. But I think what the past 12 months or so has taught us is that there's almost a second layer to that, where we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable on someone else's terms. And I think that's what you've described there, where a problem presents itself that you haven't manufactured, that you then need to have the willingness to walk towards and tackle head on. Whereas there's lots of things that we can do in our day-to-day lives that build up that resilience you've touched on, because it's definitely something that can go dormant or reduce over time. But I think there's lots of merits in trying to embrace the situations that get thrown at us that we can't control and that we didn't necessarily prepare for or didn't necessarily volunteer for. And I think that to bring it back to a general application, what do you think the biggest mistakes that are made in this day and age, by whether it's in leadership, whether it's as individuals, that prevent people from finding the best version of their own performance within their day-to-day lives? Because I know you've worked with organisations that have a lot of individuals that lead, a lot of individuals need to perform, and are there any themes that run throughout that where people are presenting themselves as the biggest obstacle?
Yeah, so you mentioned comfortable being uncomfortable, and it's such a commonly thrown around statement now, and it's something that people strive to get, and they go and search for that uncomfortableness, rightly so. You know, we need, our lives are pretty simple, and most people's lives are pretty simple and easy nowadays, way too easy. And you know, to get yourself uncomfortable for a lot of people is having to make a meal now versus kind of just sticking something in the microwave, right? And so, you know, there's lots of ways that we can seek uncomfortable, and we need to push it. We need to really get uncomfortable. And what the issue is that people they go looking for this, but then when things become uncomfortable, they don't recognize that this is what they were seeking. And then they hate it. They hate being uncomfortable, and they quickly try and extract themselves from that problem. Whereas, you know, the beauty and being self-aware is knowing that that's what you went for. You're in the moment, you're present, and you're going, well, actually, this difficult period, that horrible feeling in my stomach that this isn't going to end, that I've messed up, that this is not going to go well. That's the point. I've got to keep walking forwards. And, you know, that's where people need to recognize that feeling that you're looking for. That uncomfortableness that you're looking for is that feeling. And so when you're in it, just to keep pushing through that is where we should be trying to get to, really. But what is it that kind of the modern person, again, I'm 42, so I kind of feel, again, in many ways quite blessed that I've seen this transition and still, I would say, young enough to understand the ins and outs of social media and the benefits, etc. of it, and the pitfalls. And again, I've got enough grey hairs to have some wisdom and thought on this too. And I think the biggest problem there with modern society, I'm guilty of it too, by the way, I'm not saying I'm not, is this the ease with which we can compare ourselves to others. And what we've got now at a time never in our human history, you know, in the millennium, for as long as humans have been on this earth, we've never had it like we have now, where we can get at any moment that we choose, we can get a lens into people's lives at the very top of their game. So they might be the funniest, they might be the most creative, they might be the fittest, the strongest, they might be the most beautiful. All these incredibly, I don't like the word talented, but these incredibly high achieving people at the very top of their game, we can choose when we want to go and look and pry into their lives. And they market themselves very well, and very rightly so. You know, they're learning things and doing things that we should all try and understand if we want similar. But the problem and the consequence of that is we've not seen their journey. We never get to see their journey. And again, it reminds me, I gave a talk to, like I mentioned earlier, to the England football coaches who are doing great things at the minute. And I was invited down to talk about this word resilience. They were doing a whole day, the England football coaches were doing a whole day on what the word resilience meant. So let's not make out that it's a real easy thing to understand. And I told this story of being stood on the tail ramp of an aircraft about to parachute maybe into a hostage rescue situation at night with a team of people behind me, and the feeling that you can have in that moment, and the way your mind can go off and catastrophize about the worst things that could happen. And you have to get it back to yourself, and you have to be present. You have to, there's all these coping strategies. And we spoke about all these things. And afterwards, one of the coaches came up to me, a famous coach, came up to me and says, Gaz, I know you said that it's the same as taking a penalty in a World Cup final, that performance under pressure. He said, but it's not really, is it? Because the risk that you're taking could result in this. You've got the teams and, you're thousands of miles away from any sort of help and all these things that he was listing off. But because I'd opened up my world to him, where he was hearing these stories of me at the very top of my game, probably the finite point that I'd had in my career, where I wasn't opening the door to the thousands of days of practice up to that very point, where I was the person comfortable to look around my team and go, no, if not me, then who? So no, I am the right person, and have the confidence, the authenticity, going right the way back to my leadership point, to be the authentic leader, to be at the front and go, I'm the person to be stood here and go and do this. And we often don't look at the steps now that people take towards getting to where they're at. We just dive straight in it. Like Kevin Hart, one of the funniest men on the planet. On a daily basis, you can see what he's up to, and you think he's so successful. And you could, as an up and coming comedian, which I'm not, you could feel really bad about yourself checking what he's doing every single day. I'm never going to make it to that, and that's the problem now. We've just got this periscope, or microscope even, into people's lives, and at the very top of their game, and we get no context to their struggle. We get no context to the years that they spent uncomfortable, uncomfortable. And we just don't see that anymore. And we need to remind ourselves of that. And we need to listen to these people, and we need to listen to these people's tell the true story, of the narrative of just how hard they've worked to get there, because that's the common theme. This self-discipline to keep working hard at what it is that you're doing is this golden nugget of information that people often kind of oversee or overlook. And I think that's one of the biggest issues.
It's searching for instant gratification rather than appreciating delayed gratification, isn't it? Which is something that I know that we spoke about on Ben Nevis at some point, God knows when, bit of a blur, but it kind of ties into something you touched upon briefly there, which is being present and neutral thinking.
Yep.
Which is something that I consciously try and do, following some discussions we've had in the past. It's something that I know you're very, very good at articulating. I can imagine it's something that's been essential to your career, and now your career that's followed your military, the time spent in the military. And for those that might not be aware, do you want to just explain quickly what neutral thinking is in a nutshell, and how you think it is best applied to the individual?
Yep. So first thing to be aware is neutral thinking isn't something I've invented. Far from it. It's a term that a few other people have used. I wasn't even aware of it early in my career, but people will recognise it when I talk about it now. So we need to understand we're all negatively wired. So we are wired for protection, to not go towards a challenge like I described earlier, this car crash scene. We're wired to not run towards that in most part, because to fear for our own protection, we're wired that way. And research shows us that we're about 80% wired for negative. So most of our thoughts are negative, and it's a form of self-protection. And so knowing thyself that we're negatively wired, and we will think negatively most of the time with a new situation or a problem, then that's a good thing to know. And so to recognize that that's a negative thought, but actually it's not based in any truth. It's just it's exactly that. It's a negative, fleeting thought, and there to protect us. Well, that's not useful because it's not based on any fact. Now, people talk about being more optimistic and positive thinking, and I absolutely buy into that. There is an awful lot of research around optimism and being positive, being a positive thinker, if you can. But there's certain situations that just do not correlate to being able to think positively, and you might be in a life-threatening situation. In the moment, to say to yourself, "It's all good. It's all good. I've been here before," and got to make it to you, fake it till you make it, all this kind of stuff. It's just not real. And there's no way you can, in an ambush in Afghanistan, in the moment I thought I was going to die. There's absolutely no way on earth that I could have stuck a positive thought in there and gone, "It's all good. This is what you came for." It just wasn't in my thinking. My physiology had taken over. It's an automatic response. It's the autonomic nervous system taking control of your body to get you out of that situation, the fight-flight response. So just trying to chuck in some positive, I don't buy it. But recognizing being overly negative, that's not useful either. That absolutely is where your head's going to want to go, and having the self-awareness that that's where your head is the first thing. So self-awareness is massive. I talk about self-skills all the time. The first one being self-awareness, recognizing that you're in that negative thinking because situation's pretty bad, whatever that might be. You might be about to go and present something you haven't prepared well for. You're thinking it's pretty bad. Your mind is going to take you to a place where you're going to catastrophize about everything that could go wrong, that you're going to run out of things to say, that everyone's going to stare at you and you're going to look a complete throbber. But that's not true. It's not based in reality. It's a thought. And so taking yourself, recognizing that you're negative and just dragging yourself up into this neutral space, because just thinking a positive right now, I'm not buying it, but just recognizing that negative's not helpful either. And just finally on that, I've not to do that and to have that as a tool in your toolbox without practicing is completely unrealistic. We refer back to what we said about getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. It's those uncomfortable experiences where we can practice that skill. We can't practice that skill without finding those experiences. You can't become experienced without experiences. Simple as that. But people think they do. You can't shortcut. There's no hacks. And so to practice these things, you have to put yourself into these situations. And then we learn to, rather than having a manual gearbox and moving through these problems, we learn over time. Remember back to the England coach's story of me stood on the tail ramp. I had an automatic gearbox for those problems that were coming at me because I'd been there hundreds of times before in practice and training. So it wasn't a new problem for me. It wasn't something that I hadn't practiced and prepared for. And I was very understanding of all the issues that were going to come my way. And I had various different similar experiences that I could lean on to kind of build a picture of what was about to happen. So neutral thinking is recognizing the negatives are going to come, being self-aware to grab them, to drag yourself up to neutral. Negative's not helpful. Drag yourself up to neutral. Positive isn't always going to work, or if it does work for you, then fair play, throw it in, because having those mantras, having those things can absolutely help. But sometimes situations, your brain just wants to run away with you around the catastrophes, and that's when to recognize, be more neutral thinking is really useful.
What was the most difficult point in your military career to implement that? Was there a situation where you felt like you wanted to extract yourself, where you wanted to retreat to those comfortable situations, even though you had that automatic gearbox?
Yeah, Fergus, there's hundreds of those experiences, So like I said, to be experienced is experiences times 1,000. There's no shortcut, right? You just can't get that shortcut. You can read about other people's experiences. It's not the same. So there's hundreds of experiences at different levels where I was having to up my game. Nobody joined the Royal Marines. Nobody joined Special Forces to try and shape that organization and make it their own. No one does that. You just get into those organizations desperate to be a part of it and to hang on to this freight train of momentum that is always progressing and striving for better. So you're really trying and working hard to be a part of that. There's a number of situations where I definitely fell short, and there's a number of situations where I had to be really self-reflective, one of the other self-skills that I talk about with people, and go, right, you are far off your ideal self there. You are not living up to what you joined here to be. This pressure, some of it would have been external. I remember this one incident. Okay, I'll tell the story. So the first time that I went to Afghanistan, I was, on the face of it, very experienced. I'd spent 5 years in the Marines. I'd done a number of operational deployments. West Africa, spent a year of my life, the Troubles in Northern Ireland, a number of experiences, very different, but a number of experiences. I joined Special Forces. Within months, I'd flown straight to Iraq and done a deployment out there. And again, ticking off these boxes of things that I'd always dreamt of doing, and life was good. And that theatre in itself, I'm not saying it was easy, but it was very different. And there was a lot of things within our control that we could control to make things more comfortable. But it was incredibly exhilarating and thrilling at the same time. I was really enjoying it. But then Afghanistan was kicking off, and friends of mine had deployed, and people started to get injured, and a couple of friends were killed, actually. And these were really top of their game professional people. And I was like, well, what's going on here? Friends of mine started coming back and telling the stories, and all the time building this negative narrative inside my head. I wasn't a team leader at the time. Pre-deployment training was happening. One of the team leaders injured himself seriously. Someone had to step up. I was selected. Now, being more confident. And at the time, I think I was saying, well, why have they chosen me? This is a good thing, opportunities. But I was a very junior team leader. Again, a massive dollop of imposter syndrome. There's that ideal self that I talk about. My own self-image was down here, but I was stretching to it as a great opportunity. But actually, there's a massive consequence if I get this wrong. There's lives on the line here. So I ended up deploying early with the advanced party, and a friend of mine had been shot and killed running off a guy called Mike Jones, shot and killed running off the back of the helicopter. Mike was a great friend of mine. One of the most professional, talented guys that I knew, was going places, but his life was over like that. And that was just before we got there. On landing, again, another colleague of mine had been shot and injured very seriously, ended up losing his leg. And the group that we joined to do this handover with were beat up, understandably. All this, and these were people I had massive respect for. They were all feeling like they were beat up. And we went out on this operation. And if I'm honest, I was absolutely crapping myself. All the things I'm talking about now, I was still very early into my career, within the first few years, maybe 3 or 4 years as a team leader, which was, not unheard of, but it was very early for me, a massive amount of imposter syndrome. And I was tested, and they put us at the front, and I was running off the back of the helicopter as we landed. We'd been briefed about where we were going. All these kind of narratives were going around my head on the helicopter on the way there. Things I didn't put into practice. I allowed myself to catastrophize. As I was running off the back, all I was thinking about was Mike Jones, who'd been shot and killed running off the back. That was the things. And so I was petrified, and I ran off the back. My performance was shocking. Nothing happened that negatively impacted the operation, because I was surrounded by an incredibly competent team of professionals, and this is what we talk about teams. They rely on each other. And my performance that night, I didn't live up to my own standards, and I had to self-reflect. And I got a bit of ribbing off one of my close mates. He probably even to this day doesn't even realize the effect he had, but he kind of poked fun at me and joked about something I did, and it cut me so deep, because I cared about these people and what they thought of me. And so I had to self-reflect, and I thought to myself, do you want to be this, call him Andy McNabb if you like, this person in this book that you wanted to be, or not? And, I reflected on that, and I thought, no, I do. And so what are the things that I've got to do to improve my game here? And so more of this, tick, do more of that, tick, yeah, do more of that. And I genuinely wrote it down, and I got to work doing the things and implementing the things that the skills that I need to improve on. One of those was managing my stress. How nobody talks about this stuff, or didn't anyway. And nobody was talking about how they manage their stress on the back of the helicopter, flying to a place where they know there's suicide bombers. They know when you run off the back, they're going to start opening up and shooting at you. Nobody spoke about what they're doing to cope with that stress. It seems incredible to me now, but at the time we weren't talking about this kind of thing. I had a light bulb moment later on in my career when a performance psychologist came in and we started talking about this stuff. Maybe we can move on to that. But I was having to resolve this myself. And these are the things that I found worked. These are the things through experiences that I found out didn't work. And what was important to me, that I was tracking this growth. And that's the reality. Facing up, you're accountable to these individuals. You're accountable to your team. You're accountable to this organization. Accountability is fantastic. Another thing that modern society tries to avoid. Accountability is fantastic for driving you to want to improve yourself. And that's what I did. And in a nutshell, I just kept working. And 13, 14 years later, I was probably more of a polished article. Still work to do, by the way. Still not far from perfect, far from it. But, very much a kind of more complete person, that I can be the authentic person talking to people about what it takes to walk this journey. Because you're not the finished article. You asked me earlier on about the selection process. And they select for potential. They don't select for the finished article. The actual process, the purpose of the selection process is to select people that show the potential. So we know you're not going to find the finished article. Nobody is. And so because there's just some incredible experiences that you need to learn, and you only learn by living those experiences.
That's it, isn't it? It can't be cheated. And I think that's part of the simplicity of a lot of the discussions that I like to have on a frequent basis, in the sense that there's a lot more that we can do as individuals in a much more peaceful society than the one you're operating and describing there, that can slowly, incrementally build those experiences that mean we are better prepared for when things get chucked at us that we don't see coming. And you've stared death in the face. You've got friends, you've got colleagues that have stared death in the face, and that's not something that the majority of society necessarily need to confront as directly. What does happiness mean to you?
Yeah. So just firstly on the word death, again, maybe it's a coping strategy. Certainly never considered that heavily during my career. So certainly never spent any time catastrophizing about that. And again, there's probably a number of reasons why that you just wouldn't stick around if you did that all the time. There's plenty of people that don't stick around, and that's probably a reason why, to be fair. But what does happiness mean to me? So it's, again, wow, what a question, right? I mean, in its short form, I can find happiness in the most simple things. We described earlier on, what I've done in my past. Now I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a father to 4 children, and I can find happiness in the simplest of things. In the moment, being present in the moment, watching them learn, develop, and give them experiences. That's one of the strongest principles or purposes that I've got now to give my children, my wife, kind of an enjoyable life and give them the experiences that prepare them for this world. But also, I build into my life ways that I can reflect and find happiness after the event as well. Life's so busy now. If you don't, another self skill I talk about, self-reflection. If you don't build into your life chances or opportunities to self-reflect and to find that gratitude in the simple things. I was sat in my garden the other day and just sat there feeling the warmth on my face, feeling genuine gratitude and happiness in the moment of where I was, that I had that freedom to do it. Luckily, we've had snow today, so I could take those opportunities when they come, right? And so finding for happiness is one of those things that comes as a byproduct, I think, of the things that you pursue. I don't go out to seek happiness. It comes about by doing things that I'm choosing to do. I can find it in different ways. I can set myself a goal. I can go after that goal and I can achieve it. And I can find in the moment a sense of fulfillment and happiness in the process and in achieving it. But also in really simple things with my family, making sure that I give them the time, I give them the my experiences and my focus when the time's right for that too. So it's such a complex question, and anyone that tells you they've got it all worked out, Fergus, is a kidder. But we're all looking for it. I mean, it's there for us, and it's there for us to take and to experience. And so, but it's definitely a byproduct of what we do.
100%. I think the essence of my perception on it is it comes from exploration. And I think my perception from the conversations that we've had has always been that you are very, very self-aware and very in tune with what makes you tick, what makes you happy, what simple things are important to you. And I think that comes from a life of exploration, a life of taking yourself into the unknown and coming out of the other side and engaging in those self-skills, that self-reflection that you're so hot on, because what else can we do to move forwards than to take those experiences and remold them into the future?
Definitely. Just on that, there's definitely that's one aspect to it. There's definitely the experiences, and it gives you perspectives that you can't get through other ways. But there's also, like, this is all something in the last, I don't know, sort of maybe 6 or 7 years of my life that I've spent an awful lot more of time thinking about and finding and carving part of your life out to actually spend some time thinking about this. Call it philosophizing, call it resetting your goals, call it what you will, but actually taking time to consider these things and what it is that you're trying to achieve in the first place is absolutely critical. I mean, we've got an online course, and the plan is to have a bank of them. But the first one we did was goal setting, because it's so important to even have something to aim at, and to understand why you're aiming at that, and also for what reason, and or list to yourself all the reasons why you're actually heading towards that, because that's something that I didn't necessarily, or wasn't necessarily very good at communicating to myself years ago. This is something that I take time to do now, because, I've come to realize that actually this is something that, life will let you drift and meander around, but you need to sit and spend some time actually thinking about what it is that you want. Otherwise this world will just drag you down its paths.
Yeah, I've lived a much less explorative life than you have at this point, but I think it's something I'm very conscious of at a younger age than I think fortunately I'm at an age earlier than I'd expect to be, where I'm aware that practice is important, and it's something that I will endeavour to continue to do, because I know how valuable it has been as a recalibration method. And life is so busy. You said the Western world is chaos, and it's getting more and more chaotic by the day. And it's so easy to get lost in that white noise if you don't take time out to breathe, to reflect, and to appreciate. I think is what's easily lost. And as you said before, there's so much comparison. There's so much of a highlights reel out there that we often forget to appreciate how far we've come, and really be proud of the journeys that we've all been on. And that sort of draws on to the more pertinent question that I had thought up before, was that, are there any elements of your career that you deeply regret?
So I'm not really one to dwell on the bad things that have happened. So again, with my life, I've been through a divorce. I've lost parents. I've lost friends that you didn't get a chance to say goodbye to. All these kind of things. And so, I'm not one to really dwell on those bad things that have clearly happened. And I'm I guess my optimism and future focus does help me kind of deal with those moments. Now, so there's not something that jumps out at me that I deeply regret. I mean, I often get asked that, would I make the same decisions if I had my time again? And I absolutely wouldn't. I wouldn't live the same life that I've lived, for lots of reasons. If you're not learning stuff and avoiding issues when they come up from the life that you've lived, then maybe a bit of time for some self-reflection there. But in the moment, right now, I wouldn't sit there and say I deeply regret this. I mean, I've made some howlers, Fergus. I've had some absolute howling mistakes in my life, but they've shaped me and they've shaped my experiences. We can't change the past. And so I just say to myself, it's that accountability to myself and the people that I care about, that I won't make those mistakes again. And that's crucially important to me. So regret is one of those things that it's there for all of us to sit and catastrophize about. But personally, I'd rather make a bit of an honest agreement with myself to not make those mistakes again, and to learn from the experience, that growth mindset that Carol Dweck talks about so much.
Yeah. I think the buzzword there that you finished with was honesty. And I think what's so refreshing about your perspective on things, your career, and how that's now embedded within civil life, as it were, is the honesty and, as you said yourself, the authenticity that goes with it. And it's providing a lens into that elite performance that's incomprehensible to most people. And I think that gives a lot more relatability to each and every one of us, that things aren't so far out of reach, and that mistakes we've made, the past, any regrets that we do have, are not things that can't be recovered from, can't be moved forward with. And it's learning to not try and extract ourselves from those panicky situations, and trying to tackle things head on.
Can I just comment on that, Fergus? Again, you bring up some good points. We think back to what I said about we're negatively wired, so we spend, or can allow ourselves to spend time concern ourselves with what others think of us. The reality is people are so busy, people are so focused on their own lives. We have this perception that they're all looking at what we're doing and they're talking about our mistakes. No one cares. Everyone cares about their own life, and everyone cares about how they're perceived. So, just understand that, there isn't this abundance of people inspecting your life and uncovering all the mistakes that you've made and actually giving two hoots. There just simply isn't. That isn't a reality. But we can easily think that. And whenever something happens, we can assume that the world knows about it. And they really don't. And even if they do, nothing is ever as serious as you think it is. If you can take some time to pause, if you can take some time to gather yourself and actually to, I call a circuit breaker, to get some time away from that problem and to come back and reassess that problem, then you come to realise that it was never as bad as you thought, never as bad as you thought it was. And if it is, then there's people around you that can help, versus trying to deal with that problem by yourself. One of the things that I've learned in kind of my career is I feel quite lucky, both then and now, that I'm chosen to be surrounded by people that have got a giving attitude and a giving spirit and are there to help each other and be a part of something bigger than themselves. And when you've got that, you've got surrounded by people that actually have got your best interests at their heart. And you can often feel that people are out to get you, but the reality is there's more with you than against you. So it's never as big a problem as you think it is. That's one of these grey hairs show me that they do have an effect, but they also give me that perspective that there's never anything that's worse than I thought it was.
That's empowering for the future as well, though, isn't it? Because it means that you can take confidence in yourself once you detach the fear of the situation from the situation that you're actually in. And I think I actually had a few questions beforehand that I put out just over social media on what would people ask you if they were sitting here, and a fair few of them were around young, budding military applicants that were pondering that very question, and the situation was bigger in their head than it necessarily needed to be. And I think in many ways the question's already almost been answered, in that if you detach yourself from the fear and the catastrophe bias that we are wired to have inherently and see the situation for what it is, think about it neutrally, be present with what's coming up, then you can take things more objectively. But beyond that, is there anything else that you would give in the way of advice?
Yeah, I mean, I've literally coached hundreds through it, and the obstacle always seems bigger than it really is. But you can't look at the problem as a whole and think that you've got the solutions to it, because that's one, you're not going to, and two, that's not what we're looking for. That's not what the organisation's looking for. They're looking for people that show potential, and that first sign of potential is sticking your notice in and sticking your application in notice to attempt. That's the first and the biggest step. And people get so, you talk about regret. This is probably one of the reasons that I'm not racked with regret, is because if there's something that I've wanted, I've made steps towards it. Now, I've not always been successful at everything I've ever tried, but I've always tried. And I think you find you end up with regret when you didn't even try and you never knew. And the world's full of people that always wanted to do something but never gave it their best. And if you honestly and authentically can say to yourself that you tried and you gave it your best, then regret doesn't live there, right? It just it's kind of for the people that never even tried in the first place. So the obstacle is the way. There's a great book by Ryan Holiday on the subject. I would steer a lot of people to it. I've steered hundreds of people towards it, but it's a great book around breaking down these massive problems into smaller parts and making them a little bit more digestible. But you're not the only one anyone listening, you're never the only one that's faced that particular problem or challenge, whatever it is. And if that is the case, then there's always people that you can seek advice from, but also there's lots of people that have written about this kind of stuff and getting their wisdom from books, whether they're ancient scriptures on this or whether they're more modern authors like Ryan Holiday, then writing about the Stoics, then dig into that and just understand that you've got to walk towards the problems and bite off little pieces as you go.
Absolutely. I think it's that doesn't apply to just those that have asked about military selection, military application. That applies to us all, doesn't it? And for a general consensus to finish, I think it would be wrong not to touch upon some of the things that we've come together on in the past, which is a joint effort towards encouraging men to speak openly about their feelings, their emotions. How different is the military now from your perception to how it was when you were in it, in terms of managing, as you said, stress, mental health, the conversations around it, and most importantly, the transition once out and into the civilian world? How does the community come together now in comparison to then to manage that?
So it's hard to comment on what it's like right now. I feel quite lucky in the sense that I saw it go through a number of changes, in the sense that people became more prepared to speak out. Again, so for people's context, and I know you won't mind me talking about this, but I served alongside and with Jason Foxy off the telly. Spoke to him today actually, but and whilst he was suffering in silence, I've carried not guilt about this, but certainly some thoughts around this with regards to when he was suffering in silence, and he was lying to us around why he was having time off work. But we were so busy and so obsessed with what we were doing that we didn't spend time to keep checking in during that time, and to understand from his from talking to us, and then the book with how deep and low that he got. And to the point where he wanted to take his own life, that was shocking for me to hear, because I was completely oblivious. I spoke to him before it happened. I spoke to him after it happened, and I was completely oblivious. There was obviously things going on that I was aware of, but I just didn't see the size of it. And so, when that happened, certainly our organisation put a few things in place. That there is now a few layers to the signposting that we can. People can go through. I think that's great. I think people are now, through a ton of reasons why, again, the male suicide rates being one of them, where people are more prepared to talk now, because most people know of somebody, or a few people, or a family man, a dad, or somebody that has taken their own life. And it's absolutely tragic for the mess that it leaves behind. And so, there's a ton of things that have been put in place, and I think it's all good. What is the key thing that's going to change all of this? Well, I don't know. It's a massive problem, but talking has got to be one of those pillars that we all cling to.
It's the starting point, isn't it? And it's an evolving starting point. I think we've made an enormous series of strides in the past couple of years as a society, and I think people like Foxy put themselves out there as amongst the hardest men on the planet are doing away with that stigma that you are the hard man if you're keeping your feelings to yourself. You're doing yourself more harm than good. And those conversations, those accounts of those stories, I think the storytelling and the authentic storytelling is so important and so powerful, because it gets those conversations going, and that's why I feel that change is happening. However, the context that we're in is ever evolving as well, so we need to move with it. A pandemic was a curveball that we didn't all see coming, and that's why it's more important than ever to check in and try and not be oblivious, or try and look for the signs that might indicate that somebody's not all themselves. And it can be something very simple, it can be something a bit more complex, but the vein running through all of this is conversation. It's not necessarily the final solution, but it's definitely the starting point.
I think we're all able to see problems and deal with them either proactively or reactively. And what do I mean by that? Resilience is one of those things where we can be proactive or reactive to our preparedness for it. So we can proactively look to understand the key components to how we will deal with stress when it comes our way, because there's one thing's for certain, it is absolutely going to come. So isn't it better that we're well prepared for it? Much like it's better to be strong than to be weak. There's no negatives to being better prepared to deal with stress. So isn't it good that we understand the principles that are there? So be proactive, and again, that comes down to your own self-awareness, your own self-regulation, and then self-regulation, and then self-reflection with regards to what you could do better. But then equally, there is that reactive place of, well, challenge yourself and also, understand that you can deal with these moments when they come. And that, again, the more we can practice and be prepared for the smaller challenges, when the big ones come, we've already got a context, we've already got a perspective. So, living a safe and happy and fluffy life is all very well. And we can all live that right now. It's dead easy to live that, but it's just not real. And when problems come, they can hit us like a freight train, and we're just not prepared for that. So, being, accountable to yourself, your family, your friends, and going, I'm going to do the best I can for me and us in this situation, and be proactive and reactive in various different challenges. So I think there's a ton of stuff we can be doing.
What does success mean to you?
Yeah, so for me, success is doing the things you want to do with the people that you want to be doing them with. I work with enough C-suite, high-performing individuals on the face of it that are still lost as to what success looks like to them. There is a ton of research out there around success and happiness and what that level looks like with regards to finances. And we all know this. But we just keep getting, it's one way to measure yourself. We all need this perception of growth. We all need this ability to see us tracking better and getting success. The one way that's the easiest way to do that is to measure our income, right? Now, there is a ton of research out there that says that isn't a good way of measuring your success, right? But we fall into this trap time and time again. We're all guilty of it. And so when you can measure and learn to measure ways with your people that you care about, people with like your family, people that you want to spend some time with, and get to do the things that you want to do in this one life that you get, then for me, that's success. And finding ways to do that, carve that into whatever that looks like for you is different, and some people will have really high expectations, and some people will have middling, and some people have much lower expectations, and that's all cool because it's an individual thing. So yeah, success for me is spending as much time as I can with the people I care about, doing the things that we want to do.
Couldn't agree more. That's almost verbatim how I would have put it myself. And on that note, I think that's a nice way to leave some self-reflection for us all, myself included. So thank you once again, Gaz, and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, my pleasure, Fergus. Really enjoyed it, mate.